Hello friends, it's Jacob, back with another watercolor demo. So I've got a nice desert scene to paint today with some really interesting yucca plants, casting some really interesting shadows on the ground. Should be relatively straightforward and lots of fun. So I'm going to start wetting down my paper on both sides just like I always do. Helps it lay flat. Makes it so I don't have to tape it down. I would also like to mention that I just launched my website, jacobbentstudio.com, where you can purchase original paintings, and I will also be uploading full-length painting demos for you to download and keep forever if you want. I will also be displaying several of my paintings at the Sonoran Arts League Gallery in Carefree, Arizona for the entire month of September. So if you're in the area, feel free to stop by there and check it out. So we're going to start with the first wash, which is for the lightest values, including the sky. And I'm mixing up a nice light sky, which is very heavy on the cerulean blue and cobalt blue light, which is kind of that teal color you see on the palette. And as the sky drops towards the horizon, I'm going to be lightening it up by putting less pigment on the paper, kind of just letting the paint run out while it's on the brush, instead of constantly dipping back into it. I will go back in, add a little more cerulean blue, and drop it back in towards the top of the sky just to darken up the top area a little more. Very simple sky today. Trying my best to keep the lines perfectly horizontal as I move the brush across the paper. Taking a clean damp brush and just smoothing out the bottom of the sky. And you'll notice the sketch has quite thick, dark lines on it, and that's intentional. That's so that I can actually see the line work when I paint over top of it. And another thing I realized that I never mentioned is after I'm done doing the sketch, I will take a kneaded eraser and I will roll it over top of the pencil lead, and that gets rid of some of the excess lead, and it helps prevent the lead from streaking all over the place when you get the paper wet. So just dropping in a nice warm sandy color for the ground. Just burnt umber. Mixed it into that sky color just a little bit to take the edge off, make it a little less vibrant. And you'll notice that yucca plant in the middle right of the scene, I've painted around. I've left that white because I want that to be a nice yellowish color for those dead leaves that are hanging down, forming like a little skirt. Painting the first wash with a nice big quill brush. Painting with big brushes forces you to think about painting big shapes, which is what the first wash is all about. It's just really big, basic shapes in color. So dropping in that yellow ochre for the dead leaves of those yuccas. They've all got them. They've all got the dead leaves hanging down to make these little skirts. And then they've got the live leaves sticking up out the top, forming these little spiky tufts. They almost make little hourglass shapes. They're very weird plants. It really does look like they come from an alien planet. And that really is most of the first wash done. Not much to it in this painting. While the ground is still wet, what I am going to do is add a few areas of slightly darker paint, mixing up just a darker sandy color, burnt umber and cobalt blue, and this will just give us some subtle texture. We're going to be painting quite a bit more texture on top of this later on, but I like to start adding in that texture while the paint is still wet. Just dropping it in here and there, changing up the color a little bit. Now remember, this entire wash, and every wash we do, will dry significantly lighter. Several shades lighter than when you first put it on the paper. So this might look dark as it is, but when we start painting the middle value shape next, you'll see it in context and you realize, oh, this is actually very light. So now we're going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back and continue with the second wash and start painting these yucca. So the paper's now dry. I'm going to take a smaller brush and start mixing up some green color. I'm using cobalt turquoise light, or rather cobalt blue light, for the base of this green, dropping some cadmium yellow into it, also some yellow ochre. I want to try to capture that weird blue-green of the yucca leaves. It's a very unique kind of green. And we're just going to start dropping that in. And I really want to capture the spiky texture of these plants, so I'm painting in these short, spiky strokes, leaving a few areas here and there unpainted to give some highlights where the leaves are reflecting the sun. And my goal, as always, is to connect everything that falls within the middle value into one big shape that all flows together. And if you squint at the reference photo there, you can kind of see where that is. Most of it's going to be silhouetted with the sky behind it, and then the cast shadows from those yucca plants will also be included in the middle value shape. It's actually a relatively small shape compared to the size of the whole frame, but it works really well, I think. There's a cool sense of movement as you go back to the left and the plants recede into the distance. And the plants themselves just make the most interesting shapes. Almost look like little palm trees, the way the dead leaves hang down like that, forming their little skirts. Speaking of which, I'm going to start painting that. I got kind of a nice dark brown-yellow mix. Really trying to capture the texture of these plants. These plants are often mistaken for agave and vice versa. but a lot of the time yucca will have almost these tree trunk-like things that they grow out of. And agave will just grow out of the ground. In fact, Joshua trees are a kind of yucca that have a very tree-like quality in the way that they grow and branch out. Another difference is that yucca will bloom every year. You can see the little stalks shooting out of that big tall one in the center of the frame. And agave will only bloom once at the very end of their life, and then they'll die. So I'm mixing up some dark gray for that cast shadow on the ground, which is a very prominent feature of this painting. And you'll notice that I actually went ahead and sketched in where that shadow is going to be. I like to sketch in the shadows because it's such an important thing to get right in order for the perspective and the way everything sits within the world that I'm crafting. The angle of the shadow has to be right. And I'm also using that same color to darken some of the areas within the plants while they're still wet to make the shape a little softer. And that shadow just goes right off the edge of the frame. It's useful to have elements like that that go off the frame, off the paper. It implies that the world continues beyond the edge of the painting. And you'll notice also that that shadow connects right into the shape of the plant itself. It physically touches that paint. And usually I would save the darks for the very last once the entire middle value shape is painted, but in this case I'm kind of doing both at the same time. It just kind of worked out that way. But a lot of the time when I'm painting foliage, I will paint the darks into it while it's still wet, because it gives a softer shape and it makes it look more organic and natural. At least I think it does. Working in some of that background foliage, just with some yellow-brown color. There's some red in there too from that burnt sienna. Just earthy tones. I really enjoy working with more subdued earthy tones. I like subtle colors, but also I like making those colors vibrant. So it's like vibrant earthy tones. And just going ahead and taking some of that same burnt sienna and dropping it in here and there on the ground. Just getting some texture in there while I have that color on the brush. Obviously the ground is not the star of this show, but just like a good pizza is only a good pizza if the crust is good. A good landscape is only good if the ground it sits on is convincing. So you have to put enough work into it to make it look convincing and real. And of course that depends on what kind of ground you've got. If it's a beach, if it's rocky, if it's gravelly, if it's grassy. Just slowly working my way from right to left across the scene, adding in each little element very slowly, very carefully and patiently, being deliberate with my brush strokes, not in a hurry. I'm not in a rush to get this painting done. The only thing I have to worry about as far as time is not letting the edge of that shape dry out before I go back to paint into it again. But the way this scene flows across the paper, I don't really have to worry about it so much, because that's kind of how I'm going to be painting it anyway. It's all one continuous shape, and I don't have to really jump around in this scene like I do in others. I can just kind of work in one smooth motion from right to left. Now we're working on the centerpiece of this painting. And you see how I'm portraying these spiky plants. I'm starting in the middle and working out almost like spokes of a wheel and letting the tip of the shape get skinnier towards the top. And that does require a pretty fair bit of brush control to do that. And it takes a lot of practice to get to that point. Now dropping in the body, the trunk of this yucca, more that yellow-brown color. Every single brushstroke is very deliberate. Now the goal that I always have with my paintings is to paint loosely and expressively. But interestingly enough, in order to paint loose, you almost have to slow down and be more deliberate with your brushstrokes. Every brushstroke is intentional. I know exactly where my brush is going to go and what it's going to do. And that makes your paintings look confident, and it carries a certain weight to it. And when people look at this painting, it's not something they're going to consciously think of, but it does come across. Painting with confidence and with assuredness. If it's at all possible, painting shapes in one smooth brushstroke. And that's obviously something I'm still working on, but that's kind of the whole thing about watercolor. It's a never-ending thing to work on and to improve and find little things that you can do better. Every single painting I do is a learning experience, no matter how many paintings I've done before. So see right there, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You try to paint that shadow in just one brush stroke and then go back and add in some details here and there. I'm not even sure what it is. It just creates this really interesting, vibrant, spontaneous look. Painting in as few brushstrokes as possible and really avoiding painting over an area you've already painted. Unless, like right here, you're going to be adding in darks. Then you can paint over it. Or rather, paint into it. And here I'm just adding some texture into this plant. I was driving down a dirt road down near the Chiricahuas, actually going and looking for some yucca to paint because I was seeing them on the side of the road everywhere, and I was like, wow, I have to paint some of these. These are such cool plants. And I saw this little clump of yucca up on a hill way down this dirt road, so I drove down there and hiked up the hill and took a few pictures, and this one was the winner. It was kind of tricky to find a good angle that worked well. And that's the thing about reference photos. You've got to take pictures of the same place from multiple different angles and then see which one is going to work. If it doesn't work from one angle, there's a really good chance that it will work from a different angle. I want to paint those stalks at the top. Trying as hard as I can to paint them in one go, just like that. Just one motion, not having to go back and do it again. Painting with the very tip of that Perla brush. Letting the line break up a little bit. Adds a kind of sketchy looseness to it. Painting in those flowers at the top, just very loosely hinting at that detail. And painting in some final details of those little dry dead leaves sticking out. Make it look all scraggly. Those little tiny details are what really makes a good painting a great painting. But the trick is knowing exactly where to put them and how much to put in it. And that's a skill that only comes with a lot of practice. So just continuing on painting this middle value shape with that foliage. I'm just going to quickly drop in those last two yucca being silhouetted against the sky. And I'm painting those in a slightly cool gray just to push them back into the scene a little farther, exaggerate the space in the scene, and also to reduce the amount of detail that they have so that your eye isn't drawn to them too much. Don't want to distract from the main centerpiece of the painting too much. These are just supporting elements. Now that's the thing. In the reference photo, those two yucca have just as much detail as all of the other ones because they're not actually that far away. But in the painting, I need to decide very intentionally where I'm putting my detail. What do I want you to look at? How close and how far away do I want these elements to appear? And then just going to really loosely block in that last shape there. And then we're going to add just a little more texture to the ground, just some shadows here and there. And we'll be done with this painting. This really took me only about 45 minutes to do the whole painting. Watercolor can be very fast, very expressive. I don't have to slave away at a single painting for days on end. It's one of the things I love about it. Just adding a few final details here and there. Just darkening up a few spots to make the contrast pop a little bit. And there is our finished painting. I really hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you on the next one.